Guys, welcome back to the Motion Raceworks YouTube channel. We introduced or reintroduced the 72 Nova that I race on our last video. It became pretty apparent that not everybody knew what a floater was. It's something we noticed over time. So we thought we'd take today's video to explain the difference between a floater axle and a flanged axle, like what you see from the factory and then on a lot of race cars. Talk about when they're needed, the benefits of them, how they're set up, and kind of show you the ins and outs of it. I feel like it's a little bit of a foreign topic unless you've been into big trucks at some point or been around race cars. And for most of us, including this car, I was well past the point of needing a floater style axle. So today's video will explain all that. You can see this new modular 9-inch from Mark Williams that is underneath my Nova, already has this. And I'm excited to get to use it and get all the benefits from it, as well as the increased safety. So first and foremost, before we get started, I want to kind of just talk about why we run a floater, and then we'll dig into the main components of it. All right, so this is a traditional flange axle. How they make this is they take a piece of bar stock like this, and they smash forge it into having a hub on it. You'll end up machining it and drilling bolt patterns. We make a lot of these. For most applications, it's fine. For bigger horsepower applications, as the car starts to 60-foot, 1.0 and faster, and maybe even in the 1-teens, you can imagine the forces, especially on a very grippy track, as well as a slick tire car that needs some wheel speed. These axles are basically under all of the force that's moving the car forward. Cars are not always built 100% zero straight, so one side or the other is going to experience some drag. The flex and the horsepower and the torque being applied to it will distort this, and what you get is wheel run out. Now this is something that I've really taken a notice to in the last year or so since we bought Mark Williams. As we're at the tracks and you start to notice what cars have floaters and what don't, over time they're all coming to me and saying, I think it's time for a floater. My car is very inconsistent off the 60-foot. We can even put a GoPro on the car and you can start to see the wheel move in and out and up and down and all over the place. Even the strongest axles with a flange style are going to undergo some pretty serious forces that can cause not only safety, but performance and repeatability issues with your tune-up and everything that goes along with it. So you're all familiar with that flange style axle that's come in cars for forever. Obviously economical. You have a bearing end on the housing. There's a bearing pressed onto the axle, and then the axle slides in there and you're off to the races. A floater has a few more components, and the overall design and those components are what add the safety to it. So on this rear end in front of us is our modular 9-inch with our floater kit. You'll notice it looks substantially different than that flange axle. The base component of a floater is the spindle itself. This comes in various options. We have them for welded rear ends, we have them for modulars, but the basic premise is the same. It's a high strength piece of steel that we turn to exact dimensions. It's got a lot of strength just due to the overall diameter of it and the size of bearing that it uses. So this is actually going to be the base of things. The difference between the flange axle and a floater is, of course, that the two aren't attached. So after you have your spindle pin, you have a floater hub. So this is actually going to be what carries the wheel, but the flange isn't actually part of the axle. So it has this high strength spindle to ride on, just like a front wheel on your car. This has two bearings in it and it slides right over the spindle. Now this contains your wheel studs. So the number one benefit you'll notice right off the bat is that if you break an axle, this stays on the vehicle. A lot of times you'll see pro mods, they'll break an axle or something like that, and the car will turn left, but the wheel's not coming off. So most cars nowadays are sat down on the wheels. You can imagine whether it's on the starting line or down track, a wheel coming out from under the car is going to be a very dangerous situation. Sometimes axles break on the spline side, sometimes they break on the flange side. It really just depends how the breakage is, but it can create a very dangerous situation, both in the wheel coming through the car, leaving the side. You know, your car's now on 3 wheels, so it has no control over driving and keeping it straight. On a floater style rear end, you can at least let off the gas and you're on 4 wheels and it's still going straight. So that is your basic premises of how the wheel mounts, which is obviously independent of the axle itself. From there, you have a floater axle shaft. Now these come in both gun drilled, solid. We can make them in 4340 or 300M. Various lengths. We actually even make a one piece that has splines here in the middle for the spool, and then on the other side, one-piece shaft. A number of Pro Mod guys are switching to it. They mention it causes less rear steer. We have some unique equipment at Mark Williams that allows us to make that all in one shot, heat treat it in-house, spline it, all that stuff. It's a very unique option for this style setup, but for today's video and illustrative purposes, we have this. So if you look at it in the simplest terms, splines on the spool end, you have splines on this end. This actually technically makes up your axle flange itself. But instead of it being mounted to it, it's driven off the splines, connects to the studs, and it drives that hub. So if either one of these break, your wheel is still staying on. So if you already have a rear end, with a floater, your spindle, your hub is on, you're gonna put your drive plate on, and you're gonna slide your axle through it. It's gonna slide past the spool splines, and then it's gonna slide all the way down to the splines that engage the drive hub. From there, these holes line up obviously with your 5-bolt pattern on the hub, and that's what's going to drive your wheel forward from there. So on your hub, on ours it's actually retained by a big C-clip. These are angular bearings, as a lot of people know them, and that is a great option on this. It spins really smoothly, and for drag racing purposes, it's more than strong enough. The Mark Williams floaters have been on cars from the lowest horsepower to Pro Mods all the way to the top. Now that our axles and our drive plate, this would already be on there. It goes on, there's a cap that goes on the outside of the drive plate that retains, keeps dirt out, keeps the fluid in, and you're off to the races. So one additional safety measure that is often not talked about is the brake setup. So obviously your axle breaks, your wheel comes off. The other problem is when that happens, most brake systems nowadays have a hat with a rotor. That hat and rotor is attached to the actual axle flange. So if that exits the chat, so too are your brakes. The biggest problem that lies with that is not only you now have one less brake caliper, but in most modern plumbing systems, everything is tied together in some way or fashion. Now there are split master cylinders. We're a big advocate for those when you can actually use them. But if it's not, your master cylinder is going to lose all of the fluid instantly. Most master cylinders don't have a good divide in the middle, so you have no braking. So not only have you lost your wheel, you have no brakes to stop you from moving forward at whatever speed you're already going. Okay, so in front of us is our modular rear end. One of the beauties of this, if you haven't ever experienced it, is you can literally adapt your car over time to different wheel offsets and tire combinations, so that, if you're going 28-10-5 racing one day and you want to go, 33-10-5W racing or radial racing, it's as simple as unbolting this end bell here. You can put a different spacer in there, change your offset of the vehicle, bolt it back all together with a different set of axles, of course, and you're back on track without having to have multiple different rear ends. So that's why it's really cool as far as that goes. Our actual floater system is also semi-modular. So once you have your spindle pin either welded in a welded rear end or bolted in as they are on our modular rear ends, you can literally switch the hubs at any time. Why this is important: if you want to go between a 4 3/4 bolt pattern to a 5x5 inch or a 5x5.5 even, you simply take the C-clip off of your spindle, take your brakes off, of course, slide everything apart, put the new hub on, put it together, and you're off. On our Mark Williams floater setup, we also now have options for TBM brakes in steel or carbon, as well as Mark Williams brakes in steel or carbon. Now those carbon and steel do use different hubs just because the attachment mechanism for the actual rotor is different, but it's nice that you can leave the rear end the same, but switch bolt patterns, switch brakes as your car evolves. We've all seen it throughout the years, and it gives you a lot of versatility. Okay, so floater mechanism for mounting it. We talked about how our modular system actually presses this into the end bell here, and then it's retained by the brake plate that goes all the way through that. On a fabricated rear end like this one from TRZ for one of our coworkers, Tanner Stover, you can actually see it's welded in. So for this, we sell a long extended spindle, and the reason why that is, you can weld the end of it, and then you can actually do rosette welds down it. Some people on shorter rear ends, especially like on Pro Mod stuff, you'll actually see them weld inside the tube in here as well. So that gives you a good mechanism where you can secure it with a weld that's strong and doesn't allow it to rock. So applicable for both modular as well as fabricated. In the coming weeks, we will also have a 4130 version of that spindle as well for easier welding and fabrication on a fabricated style rear end. Now I will note both this style and this style use the same hub, so it goes right on there. So if you do buy a floater kit from us today for your fabricated rear end and you go to a billet or a modular cast case at some point, everything is interchangeable. You can just buy the spindles. In the past at Mark Williams, you weren't really able to buy all that stuff a la carte. We want to make things more builder friendly these days. So if you're a guy that builds a lot of rear ends, we sell just the spindles by themselves so you can weld them in a rear end and then decide what brakes and what bolt pattern you want later. Also, our kits now are available. You can buy the whole kit minus brakes. You can buy the whole kit with brakes. You can buy long and short spindles. We want to make it easier for you guys to use this platform. It's a tried and true thing that's trusted by so many people. However you need to buy it to build your process or have inventory on your shelf if you are a builder is how we want to sell it to you. So the common question we get is, there's two things. Number one, weight. So it does add a few pounds over a flange style axle. However, you have to imagine a flange style axle has a thick aluminum hat that mounts the rotor, the actual flange of the axle itself. So the weight differences can vary depending on what axles and how things are built, but it's usually fairly minimal. The performance 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, offsets all of the little bit of weight that you add. One thing that I've noticed over the years, done it with my car, Brett's car, I've seen Stevie Fast do it. The first time you start to add weight, it's typically to the rear end of your car. It is a unsprung weight. It is a lot more forgiving as far as how it acts with the chassis. You can imagine adding 10, 15, 20 pounds to the front or back of the car. It's really difficult if you have a car that's dialed in to be able to add that weight somewhere. You'll actually see pro mod guys complain about it pretty often. You think, oh man, they only got 20 pounds, but they're running over people last week. That type of weight will drastically affect the performance of a chassis. If there is a place to add a little bit of weight, that's it. And you have to remember that all floater kits are going to add a certain amount of weight. So the next thing is cost. A steel brake setup, floater setup for this or this is about $3,600 on our website. If you add up all the components, it actually is a pretty good value. If you imagine you have a car that makes 2,000 to 3,000 horsepower, and you did want to run an axle, a flange style axle, you're going to run 300M axles, which are a couple $1,000s for a set of them. You're going to want to get good chromoly housing ends like we sell at Mark Williams, so they're strong and don't deflect, don't leak. So those are a couple $100s. Your brakes actually cost less on a floater setup because there's less components, so we don't have a hat to mount to, it mounts directly to the hub. So you save a few $100s there, and then there's the safety aspect of it. At the end of the day, you're talking about small difference. Safety and the performance gains are paramount to what you're doing, especially when you're talking about the value of the car that it's under and what it could potentially do for not only going faster, but saving it. And a lot of people don't think about the down the road saving it. When a wheel comes out from underneath your car, you're definitely gonna wish you had a floater. I guarantee it 10 times out of 10. At the performance numbers these people are running nowadays, including some of my good friends, it's not worth risking, and even the best axles on the planet are undergoing some severe trauma, I would call it. Not only that, if you're in Australia, I think there is actually a rule if your car goes 750 or faster, regardless of weight, it has to have a floater. I wouldn't hate to see that in the US. We've all seen the results of an axle coming out or breaking. It's not a bad idea, and it's a good place to put your money.
Hey guys, as you heard Doug talk about the difference between the floater and the standard 9-inch housing end, I'm going to go a little more in depth on that subject here, and then my personal experience with that and what we've seen at the track a lot and a lot of friends racing cars. So basically, we start off with you start with a stock rear end, and then you move up to a C-clip eliminator at one point, and now we're making a bunch of power. We're building a race car, and we're going to do what's called a 9-inch housing end. So as you know, these housing ends can be welded on a lot of different differentials. But what the 9-inch housing end is this standard new style Ford big bearing that goes into the housing, and then there's a retaining plate that holds it into place here. So the bearing goes in there, rides on that plate. Okay, pretty standard. You've seen that a bunch of times. The issue comes into play with this now that we're getting faster. 1.10 60 foots, 2,000 horsepower above is really where I've seen personally this becomes a problem, and it's just because of flex, right? We have one mounting point for the whole drive axle that, the vehicle is going this way, this is turning this way, we're trying to launch it, we're trying to do this, and the bearing's holding here. So we have deflection here, we have deflection out, all riding on one single bearing that's, just a tolerance fit in there with a retaining plate holding it. The only thing holding the bearing onto the axle is a press fit between the bearing and the axle shaft, and then another piece that's called a wedding ring here that's pressed on over the fact. What I actually saw on my car and a bunch of other people's cars, I saw my brakes were starting to get a groove on the outside. And we're like, what's happening to the rotor? What happened is when you launch your car, the wheels are actually trying to push the axles out of the car. It's one of the forces that's happening that you don't really think about that's doing it. When it does that, it's actually pushing the axle out of the bearing. It actually moved the axle on the bearing, so it pushed the brake rotor into the caliper bracket. That was kind of like a wow moment for me and us when we looked at it, and we're like, wow, what is really happening in this rear end? At the speeds at the time I was running, high to mid sixes with the car, which when you think about it, you think floater, pro mod, race car, and really we need to kind of change our way of thought and kind of get that down into where we're at now, because a 6-second car, high 6-second car, it's a very fast car. We take it for granted because it's a lot easier nowadays to do that than it used to be, but that's when we really need to start looking into the floater design. We mentioned the safety thing, which is very important, but the performance gain also from this is the other huge benefit. So now as we get into the floater setup, the real main reason for the benefit of this over this that we're talking about, single bearing deflection, is now this is the spindle here. So this is the housing end. This part here, this is welded onto the housing end or it's bolted on if you have a modular. This is the new end of your axle. The drive flange, or the hub, now has an inner and an outer bearing that goes over this pin and rides. Okay, so now we have an inner and outer bearing. So now as flexes and forces are starting to move it this way, trying to move it out, it can't deflect because it has two surfaces apart from each other, a few inches apart from each other to hold it in place. Another huge benefit of the Mark Williams floater, it gets overlooked a lot. I've used a few other brands' floaters, and this style of sealed roller bearing that Doug talked about is great because you don't need to set the preload on this. This bearing preload is already set here from the factory, the press. You slide it on and you put it clip. The older style floaters or other manufacturer floaters that came in old four-wheel drive trucks and are in some race cars now use a tapered roller bearing with actual adjust. So it's like a front wheel bearing setup. So you're actually adjusting the preload and setting that on the bearing. Over time, that can loosen up. Those bearings are always under a heavy preload, where these are under a less preload. These roll easier, have better deflection capabilities, and just do a better job. As you can see here too, the other benefit of going to the floater on this bearing is just the size of the bearing. So the bearing is considerably larger. Even the smaller outer bearing is considerably larger than the 4 9-inch bearing here. So what that does is it allows more surface area for deflection and forces to be applied to over 2 bearings, and then also slows the bearing speed down. So you can imagine your 2,500 horsepower car leaving the starting line, trying to pull 3 Gs, flexing on this bearing, pulling out on this bearing. It spins easy now, but what's that look like under pressure? It's probably not very good at all. Compared to here, much bigger bearing, slows bearing speed down. It's gonna live a longer life and do a better job. So when's the time to think about when I should go to a floater? If you already have a rear end in your car, it's already built, you're thinking about it. As your car gets faster, where I saw actual failures start to happen and really scared us was when, my car started going, high 1.0 60 foots, low 1 60 foots consistently. And that was at like 2,900 pounds, which is a general weight for a lot of race cars nowadays. So, that happens pretty quick. And then basically another thought is like, I'm thinking if I need to build a rear end housing from scratch, or if I'm ordering something super custom for my car, and I know, we all know we want to make this, but then the next goal happens really quick, is to spend a little bit of more money and do the floater right off the bat, because then you never have to change it. It's good for the life of your car. You're safe. Like Doug mentioned, one axle failure and the cost at a time, all of that goes right out the window because the car is a lot more value than a rear end would be. So, going to a floater, honestly, as soon as possible. As he said, the rule in Australia is 750 because they know at the car's weights over there, that's approaching the 2,000 horsepower number, and that much, torque applied to this bearing setup just really isn't made for the drag racing level that we're doing nowadays. The performance aspect gain of the floater too is really substantial. So the consistency you get out of this and the improved 60 foot you're gonna get from the less resistance and the less deflection. You have better tire plant, the wheel's not gonna move as much, the wheel's facing straight instead of whichever way this is moving is another huge benefit. We've got reports back from several racers, including Brad Edwards on his car, run the same tune-up from a flange axle to a floater axle, and it went faster on a floater axle. And that's one of the problems with it happens in the industry as a whole, but one of the things with the floaters is so-and-so uses a flange axle, he's fine, or so-and-so does, he's fine. Try not to take all of those cases in consideration for your build. Try to do the research, know where you're gonna be, and get the best thing that's gonna keep your car safe and get you the best performance, right off the bat, so you don't have to spend your money twice. With the consistency that you need to race competitively and to get good data, even if you're just time slipping to make it, to run a faster time, the consistency of the 60 foot is crucial. And one of the things I see a lot of people chase, and I've chased myself over the years, and I didn't know it at the time, and you may not know it right now, it's happening to you, is the flex from the axle flange and from the wheel from this style of rear end that's in your car. So you can barely see it on camera, and a lot of times the camera distorts things that slow anyway, so there's no good way to measure this. And then I don't know, it was the same tune-up we ran last pass, must be the track. Must be the track is always the answer. Well, it's not. Maybe the track was a little better, so it caused this to deflect a little more because it did have traction, so maybe the track did come into play. But at the end of the day, the problem is this stuff's moving around. And the main thing we're trying to do on these race cars is to stop stuff from moving around so we can go straight as fast as we can. So another hidden benefit to the floater, and by the way, we've been using the word floater a lot. The axle floats in there, right? There's nothing holding it in. That's where the term actually comes from. The spindle bearing design is a side benefit from that. Anyway, the benefit that I really like with my car, I unload the car, push it around a lot by myself, or you got to grab your girlfriend, she's at home, Tia helps a lot, is as soon as you turn the wheel, you can't move the car anymore because of the spool. So it's super easy. You pull the 3-bolt cap off the end of your axle because the wheel's open, and you pull out one axle shaft. Takes about 2 minutes, and now you can push your car around like it has an open differential. I literally do it every time I push my car into the garage. It's super easy. Once I realized I could do that, it was nice. Another benefit is changing a third member. You don't even need to take the wheel off the car to change the third member. If you need to service it, if you need to change gear ratios, you pull that cap, slide the axles out a few inches, pull the third member out. So serviceability on something like this is another huge benefit on a race car that you're working on multiple times a day when you're at the racetrack. So on the floater housing, another cool thing is that it moves the brake inboard because it has this extended hub here, so the wheel comes out here, so your brakes stay out of your wheel, so it makes less mess inside your wheels, and depending on your offset, you can actually change the brake pads without taking the wheel off. We did note that the floater housings end up a few pounds heavier than a standard housing. One thing to know when you're ordering a housing or when you're mocking up your car, a good thing to do is we like to run the rear ends shorter than you normally would, and you can make that up with your wheel offset. So if you're building this from scratch, you can basically choose whatever wheel offset you want. The wheel's the same size, but you're physically making the housing shorter, the axle shorter, so you can lose 10 pounds or so by taking an inch or so off your actual housing itself, and the wheel's gonna be the same weight no matter what.
All right, guys, thank you for joining us for our deep dive. As we've bought Mark Williams and we've kind of reintroduced it to the world, especially the world that we race in, things have really taken off and we're excited and thankful for that. If you're looking at a floater, the one thing we didn't talk about is it's definitely possible at times to add a floater to a rear end. It wasn't previously a floater because of the way the spindle's on there, the hub and everything like that. You can call your chassis builder and say, can I add a floater to this? Most times, as long as the tube diameter is right and they're willing to do it, it's something you can add on just about whenever. Nowadays, you can get our floaters through just about every rear end builder in the country. Give them a call. If you like what you saw here, they can definitely get you set up with what you need, whether it's on a modular housing or a welded housing, a pre-existing or a new build altogether. We thank those guys for their support, and we thank you for tuning in. Hope you learned something. Hope you know a little bit more about floaters and when they're necessary. In my opinion, they're necessary more times than they're not on the power level we're running today on a lot of these cars. So definitely look into it. Your safety and performance is something that can be gained from it. I think that's a big win across the board. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We will see you guys later.